Okay, good afternoon. Hi, welcome to the 8th session of the Fall 2020 Sunoikisis Digital Classics program. This session is on translation technologies, and our presenters today will be Franziska Naether and Chiara Palladino. Franziska's from the University of Leipzig, and Chiara's from Furman University in South Carolina. And this session is going to follow on a little bit from the other digital approaches to linguistics and language sessions that we've had this semester. We had a session on computational linguistics a few weeks ago and on the use of tree banks last week, I think. I think today Chiara's going to start us off with a basic introduction to translation technologies, and then the session is going to focus in more on one particular technology, that of text alignment and translation alignment, and Chiara's going to talk a bit about that, and Franziska's going to give us a case study and walkthrough of some software. So if you're watching this live, please feel free to leave comments and questions and join in the discussion at the end using the live chat feature, which is somewhere over on the right-hand side of the screen over there. If you're not watching this live, welcome anyway. Please feel free to use this session and this video in any way you can, but obviously you can't participate live in it. So, okay, I think I'll hand over to Chiara.
Thank you, Gabby. So I hope that everybody can see my slides, and I'm going to introduce everything about the theoretical aspects of translation technologies, text alignment, and then I'm going to show you a general overview of the tools that we use for translation alignment with a specific focus on historical languages and underrepresented languages, and then I'm going to show you some applications, that is what we use translation alignment for. So this is roughly the outline for this session. So I want to start with something a bit more general, a bit more theoretical, if you like, about why we use and how we use technology for translation to establish correspondences between languages. And I'm sure that this is no mystery to anyone that translation technologies are extremely important in our world for communication, for the industry, for education. We use software to establish correspondences between sources, text, or oral communication all the time. And so it is a field that is really growing up, and it's consistently improving. It's been consistently improving for the last few years. So this is kind of the reason why we're having this session, really. And I want to start by talking about two fundamental types of tasks that we use technology for in the field of translation, because I feel like it's important to establish this distinction. On the one hand, we have tools that are generally used as a support for human translators, and these are the CAT tools, the computer-aided translation tools, that do not do all the work. They leave the human doing the work, but they somehow facilitate the process in a lot of ways. And then on the other side, we have machine translation or automatic translation, which is the use of computer software for, as the word says, for automatic translation from one language to another without the support of a human. And these two things are essentially intertwined, and we will see how in a minute. So on the one hand, we have CAT tools, which is a set of software that are going to be very familiar to professional translators, especially because there's a variety of programs that translators use in order to facilitate the most mechanical parts of the process of translation. So for example, they enable you to work with different file formats. They have translation memory. So there is a database that stores sentences or paragraphs or segments of a text that you have previously translated, so that you can query them to avoid, translating the same thing multiple times. They're integrated with dictionaries. They also, most of them have a translation management system, which is software that automates all the repeatable non-essential aspects of human translation so that you can maximize efficiency. And so typically there's some linguistic technology that supports the human translator in the process. And there is a variety of things that are available to professional translators, which typically are subscription tools. So for example, SDL Trados is very famous. Across is another very famous tool for professional translation, and so on. And these are used all across the world for professional translation of texts. The other side of the system is somehow sort of the ultimate goal, right? The idea that machines can somehow be trained to create automatic translation. So either to automatically establish correspondence between two languages, two sources in two different languages, or even to translate an input in a given language into a different language without human intervention. And this is sort of the ideal, of course, and there are several methods that are generally used in order to achieve this goal, which work more or less efficiently depending on a variety of contingent factors. So for example, we have rule-based machine translation, which is essentially a method of combining grammar and language rules with dictionaries, with online dictionaries that are customized. One of the most famous methods is statistical machine translation, which basically uses training data sets that is already aligned pairs between languages, combined with statistical models and various algorithms that essentially train the machine to create automatic translation between different sources or different languages. And there is a variety of those. There is Giza++, which I'm going to show you in a minute. There is Moses. There is a Cambridge statistical machine translation system. There is a Stanford phrasal, which uses a phrase-based method, and so on. And then the new kid on the block is the neural machine translation, which is essentially a way of using neural networks and machine learning to teach the machine, to make the machine learn how to translate, to generate automatic translations, ideally from an input that is constituted by a sentence in one language. And then the machine is supposed to return that sentence translated in a different language as the output. And this is, for example, the case of very, very famous translation technologies like Google Translate, for example. So there is a general principle that all of these methods have in common, which is they need to have some degree of training data available, whether that is grammar and language rules or training data sets of aligned pairs for statistical machine translation, and so on. The general idea is that the more training data you have, the better the machine is going to perform, and the more refined that the underlying algorithm is going to be. And so it goes without saying that if your corpus is not that big, or if there is little availability of translation data and dictionaries, the operation becomes much more complex and much more prone to error. And so we'll get back to this in a minute. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that these two parts, CAT tools and machine translation, are intertwined, because on the one hand, machine translation supports human translation in various ways. And on the other hand, CAT tools provide training data sets that are going to improve existing machine translation models. So they are, in a way, two sides of the same coin. So our discussion is going to begin with the actual true starting point. So the principle of translation alignment and the establishment of correspondences between languages. When we want to study the relationships between languages and correspondences between languages, we start from a simple idea, which is the principle that we can establish a match between two sources, so an alignment in a way, that establishes some kind of connection, whether that is in meaning, morphology, expression, between two tokens in two different languages. And this alignment can be either partial or total, meaning that it implies a match in only a part of the meaning, or full match in meaning or meaning and morphology, and so on, depending on, again, the various aspects that we want to consider. And the other thing about the alignment is that it can be established between tokens between the two languages. So not necessarily individual words, but also you can have an alignment of documents. You can have an alignment between phrases or lines or expressions, multiple words, and so on, depending, again, on the particular context of your investigation. So in general, what is text alignment? What do we talk about when we talk about text alignment? Text alignment is essentially the underlying task to any sort of automated translation method. It is, for this reason, one of the most important tasks in natural language processing. And the idea is that we should be able to perform translation alignment automatically, or at least semi-automatically, through some of the methods that I illustrated to you at the beginning. In principle, text alignment is just a comparison between two or more texts, which are also called parallel texts, and we will get to this in a minute, in the attempt to define similarities or divergencies. And it can be performed across texts in the same language. So sometimes we can talk about intra-language alignment, and you can see some examples of intra-language alignment right here. There is an automatic pairwise alignment that is performed with another program, iAligner, that you can see in the first picture of this slide. Or we can do a comparison between texts in different languages. And in that case, we talk about cross-language alignment or translation alignment. And you can see an example in the second picture in this slide, which is a translation alignment between Armenian and German. As I mentioned, you can have either an alignment between two texts, in which case we talk about pairwise alignment, or multiple alignments. So you can have ideally more than two. And the reason why we distinguish the number of the text is because it determines differences in the use of alignment algorithms once we get to automatic methods. And it also implies some differences when we have to create some applications, such as dynamic lexica, that use translation alignment. Both operations are, of course, very complex from the standpoint of natural language processing. But the principle is that we can ideally perform them automatically. And there exist different models that will do that, which we will talk about in a minute. And here you can see an example of a multiple text alignment. So we have 4 texts in an intra-language alignment in the first picture in Greek, and 3 texts in translation alignment or cross-language alignment between ancient Greek, English, and Persian performed on Ugarit. So this is the idea, this is the principle. You can see that divergent parts across the text are highlighted in a different color, and corresponding parts across the text are highlighted in a green color, or black color in the case of the trilingual alignment here. So I mentioned that when we talk about translation alignment, we also talk about parallel texts as a structural feature of translation alignment, because translation alignment or cross-language alignment uses parallel texts or parallel corpora as its main sources, as its main data input. Parallel text is just a technical word to indicate a text placed alongside a translation or translations virtually in many languages. And so large collections of parallel texts are also called parallel corpora for that reason. And this is the reason why we talk about translation alignment, because we align parallel texts in different languages. And potentially you can do this in 2 to infinite languages, depending on how refined your method is. But of course, as we mentioned, the more the text and the more the languages, the more sophisticated and complex the operation is. So some examples of parallel corpora that are very famous. There's the Bible corpus that contains a large variety of unique translations of the Bible, and they are freely available online. There are translations of guided poems that are available online. Of course, one of the most common examples of parallel corpus is film subtitles, which of course establish correspondences between different languages. You can see Game of Thrones here, and you can access many of these freely online. So as I mentioned, translation alignment, and in general automatic translation, is an extremely sophisticated task from the NLP standpoint, because it has to take into account a variety of different factors that are not necessarily immediately quantifiable. And if you think about the complexity of a language, it is pretty easy to understand that sometimes it's extremely difficult to establish perfect matches across texts or even across different languages. One of the most common problems that we have, both in interlanguage and cross-language alignment, is crossing dependencies, which is, in other words, word order. Languages express sentences and word order in different ways. And there's not always perfect correspondence, sentence by sentence or even word by word, for the same reason, because languages express things and meanings in completely different ways, which sometimes imply a different number of words or even different punctuation as well. And of course, there's also the problem of cultural linguistic context, which is particularly frequent for particularly sophisticated texts or sources that have a dense number of wordplays, stylistic peculiarities, allusions. Poetry is particularly difficult, and so on. So there's a variety of things that can contribute to a different result in translation alignment, either that we are using manual translators or that we are performing the alignment automatically. Another thing that I want to emphasize is, once again, the availability of training data. If we have a large variety, a large number of data sets of training data of manually aligned pairs across languages, it's going to be very easy, or relatively easy, for us to establish rather sophisticated and rather accurate translation alignment strategies and models, which of course works great for modern colonial languages like English, for example, but it's not so great for languages that have structurally smaller corpora to begin with, and definitely much less frequently available data sets in terms of aligned pairs. So historical languages, minority languages, and also it's particularly significant here because the gap in context and cultural difference is often even more significant in these languages because we cannot reconstruct the context entirely when we go to translate a historical language. So for all these reasons, the tools and the applications for translation alignment in historical and underrepresented languages are kind of a word by themselves in a way. So I'm going to show you in a minute a couple of tools and applications for translation alignment that are essentially restricted to historical languages, although they can potentially be used for a variety of modern languages as well. Because while on the one hand, there is a large number of professional applications for translators that can facilitate their job, if we want to focus on the study of historical languages, most of the tools that deal with those and are optimized for those come from research and academic environments, necessarily, where there are generally more people who are more compelled to the study and to the preservation of the linguistic heritage. So most of the tools that we're going to discuss here today are created in the context of universities or research institutions. They're free most of the time, and they can currently be used in educational and research settings, which is essentially the purpose that they were created for. And we can say that it all begins here from the Alfeios Translation Alignment Editor. Alfeios is a great project that displays also a variety of other features in its reading environment. And you can go to the entire project by the link provided here. And one of the tools that Alfeios provides is a translation alignment editor that allows a user to create alignments to the word-by-word level between two texts in two different languages, or even potentially the same language. Some of the characteristics of Alfeios is that you have to save locally and download your data, so it's not web-based in the majority of cases, even though some alignments are publicly available as case studies for the reading interface. And one of the cool things about Alfeios is that it actually offers two different text views. One is the parallel text, which you can see on the left, and the other one is the interlinear text view, which you can see on the right. Then there is, of course, Ugarit, which Franziska is going to illustrate in a minute. And then more recently, we have Ducat, which is a tool that we are working on at Furman with my colleague, Christopher Blackwell. and DUCAT is short for Daughter of Ugarit Citation Alignment Tool. So this is the Daughter of Ugarit, and it is a tool that is integrated with the CITE and CTS protocols, and it is used locally to align citable passages of text. So not only word-by-word alignment, but also potentially any passage of a text that is citable through the CTS protocol. So it can be documents, it can be sentences, it can be words. It works locally at the moment, and potentially you can align an unlimited number of texts. And then in the last few minutes, I'm going to illustrate a couple of applications of text alignment. So what we use text alignment for in sort of the larger view of text alignment tools and machine translation as well. I'm going to show you a couple of things first. I'm going to start with why and how we use text alignment in education as a learning tool, and to the side also as an important support for reading ancient languages. And then I'm going to talk about how we use translation alignment in crowdsourcing efforts to collect training data for automatic machine translation, as we mentioned. And I want to emphasize again, the idea is that because we don't have as much training data for Latin or classical Arabic or Egyptian or Persian, as much as Google has for English, Italian, or German, for example, so many of these tools function as a way to create new training data sets for languages and cultures that are usually not represented as well as the modern Central Europeans ones. And so they are essentially created to facilitate, on the one hand, the collection of training data, and on the other hand, the reading and the study of those languages for those who are interested in them. One of the first things that we have to observe regarding text alignment and text alignment editors in general is that they also offer a structural way to facilitate reading for non-experts, for students, or for people who are not comfortable with the language of with the source language. So on the one hand, the availability of aligned translations that are ready to be used is an extremely important innovation for the study of languages in general, which is only truly possible in digital environments, because text alignments have a degree of dynamic visualization that is only valuable if you do that in a digital environment. On the other hand, the possibility of doing a translation alignment yourself as an exercise can lower the entrance barrier for students who are not immediately comfortable with a different alphabet or a different linguistic structure, such as an inflected language, for example. And so they can provide students and just scholars of the language with a very hands-on method to assess linguistic differences. And so to start from there in becoming a bit more comfortable with reading the language and with studying the language. So in this picture here, you can see a trilingual alignment of Herodotus's histories, so between ancient Greek, English, and Latin, respectively. And the student was a student of ancient Greek and a native speaker of English, but he had never seen a text in Latin. So he was able to recognize some cognate words between ancient Greek and Latin and use English as some kind of bridge language between the two to better understand how they could work together. And then, as I said, if we have already aligned parallel corpora, we have a completely new way to potentially read and use an ancient text, even for people who don't know at all anything of the original language or are just not familiar with it. And so the elements of the Iliad, for example, which are also displayed in Alpheus as well, can be used by non-expert readers or just people who are passionate about the Iliad to investigate correspondences in vocabulary and just learn something new by accessing the original text in a way that is much easier and much more accessible than just having them side by side in a normal on-paper edition. And what you can see here is actually a new tool that is being developed by James Stauber for the Scythe reader, which is called Explore Homer. I cannot provide you with a link yet, but it's coming. And then the last part that I want to talk about is what are the sorts of machine tasks that we use translation alignment for. On one hand, we have the creation of aligned texts for different kinds of purposes, whether they are research, education, or just the pleasure of reading. On the other hand, all of these data are used in order to perform some kinds of automated tasks. This is the model for Ugarit in particular, which Franziska is going to illustrate in a minute. The principle of Ugarit is that Ugarit was created as some kind of crowdsourcing project to collect translation pairs as training data sets. So the users of Ugarit, the editors, would create aligned texts, would align translations of different texts in historical languages, and they would provide a variety of translation pairs, which would constitute the core of training data for testing automatic translation alignment on historical languages. Translation pairs in Ugarit work together with a variety of other supporting methods, such as translation memory, which we mentioned before. There are a variety of digitized bilingual dictionaries, like the LSJ, for example. There are some tools for morphological analysis, and then there is also some automatic alignment methods based on statistical machine translation, like Giza++, that contributes more translation pairs to the training data set. And two basic functions that the translation pairs are used for that you can actually see on Ugarit are the search function and the dynamic lexicon. So the dynamic lexicon is generally a kind of a more sophisticated idea that uses one language as a bridge between two languages that don't have much training data between themselves in terms of aligned pairs. And we will see how that works in a minute. The principle is that we can use one very frequent language like English as a pivot to establish correspondences between two less frequently available languages, like, I don't know, Arabic and Latin, for example. So this is an idea of how the search function works in Ugarit. Basically, you can type any word. So in this case, you can see the word in English, life. And you can obtain all the words that have been aligned with that word across all of the languages that are available in Ugarit. So every time the word life in English has been aligned with any word in Persian, Ancient Greek, Latin, or Japanese, I think that's the last one, you're going to be able to see that in the search function. A more refined version of that search function is the core idea of the dynamic lexicon. The idea is that there are some correspondences between the language that you searched for, in this case, the English for life, and a variety of different languages. And by using that English word, that central English word, as a bridge, you can actually establish correspondences across those languages that don't necessarily have immediate translation pairs between themselves. So, for example, by using the English life, you can actually establish a correspondence between Latin and Ancient Greek, or Latin and Persian, or Ancient Greek and Persian, and so on. And for this reason, in order to implement this principle, which is a core principle of the dynamic lexicon, we're actually switching Ugarit to a graph database, which should make this function a bit more dynamic and a bit easier to implement. And you can see Tarek's paper for more information about this. He explains the principle behind using a graph database to do something like this, to implement a dynamic lexicon function. The general principle is that in a graph database, we can represent every translation pair as two nodes connected by an edge that is labeled as translation. And this, of course, facilitates the establishment of connections across languages throughout the network, because it effectively creates a network between words that are expressed in different languages. And so ideally, you can create searches and queries across languages to establish correspondences between different kinds of translations of the same words. The final result for more frequent words is, of course, a giant spaghetti monster in the network, but the network, because it's based on a graph database, can be further refined with more specific searches. It can be cleaned up, of course, and ideally, we should be able to also refine it with morphological analysis, lemmatization, and so on. Another way to visualize translation pairs and refine the correspondences between them is the translation cloud, which is based on essentially a frequency of the alignment between words. So as you can see here, there's a translation cloud for the word city or equivalent. And the bigger words on the screen are, of course, the words that more frequently correspond to the word that you're searching for. And so based on that, based on the frequency, you can see which words are used the most often to translate a given word in any language, and which words are used less often. And this is particularly important when it comes to implementing statistical machine translation, so a method that ideally should lead us to some sort of automatic translation across languages, or automatic alignment across languages. In Ugarit, we use the translation pairs, the aligned pairs produced by the users and by Giza++ as well, as training data to implement automatic alignment methods. And this is the reason why I was saying Ugarit, as much as similar translation alignment editors, functions as a crowdsourcing project, because all of your pairs, all of your aligned pairs will function to improve statistical translation methods for historical languages in particular. The core method at the base of the efforts that we do in Ugarit is statistical machine translation, which I mentioned at the beginning. The idea is that a machine should be able to generate an automatic alignment between parallel texts or parallel corpora on the basis of statistical models that are trained through a variety of, an abundance, hopefully, of training data sets generated from manually aligned pairs or automatically aligned pairs. So the principle is that we have two sentences in two different languages, and the machine has a database of potentially aligned pairs, and based on the frequency with which specific parts of that text are translated statistically in the training data sets, the model can be implemented, and the machine can establish automatic correspondences based on how often certain translations, certain alignments are established across the two languages. Okay, so I think that this is everything for me, and I'm very happy to leave word to Franziska for a live demo and an explanation of Ugarit.
Thank you, Chiara. Could we maybe, if anyone has a couple of questions or anything they wanted to raise, this might be a moment to ask something. I just say that because I have a question, and so I'll abuse my chair's privilege by imposing them there. I'm wondering about the, so any kind of statistical translation or machine-assisted translation requires very heavily on context to understand which of many different translations of a word is preferred. Do the dynamic lexica keep context, or are they just word to word or token to token?
No, at this point, no. We don't keep track of the context. It's just the aligned pairs for now.
Right. Yeah. So that's a shortcoming in terms of the ability of it to generate a machine,
yeah,
a contextual
definitely.
Machine translation.
At this point, we're mainly concerned with collecting as many training data as possible. But hopefully it's going to be possible to add the context at some point.
If I can add a few words about the dynamic lexicon, originally the idea was to use a bridge language, for example, for getting the alignment between Latin and Greek using English as a bridge language, depending, of course, on translations in a dictionary. This is not a context, but this is another level where we can get different translations and using the bridge, English, as the bridge if the Latin and Greek words share the common translation. Of course, this translation depends on the context.
Of course, we can add some forms of lemmatization and part of speech tagging as well, morphology and so on, which are part of the linguistic context, so to speak. So these are all things that contribute to the output, but specifically context-based, not yet.
Yeah, and word collocation can in theory be added. Once you have it in a graph database, then you can add a second kind of node, which is, relationship is not translation, but relationship is occurs in the same sentence as, and that could be added automatically to the,
in theory,
to the
yes.
data, in theory. Yeah. I mean, if you still have the original Ugarit transcripts, yeah. There is one question in the chat, and then after this we'll pass to Franziska. But Vido has a question. The frequencies will be effectively the frequencies will be impacted by the size of the corpus that you're based on, not necessarily therefore making them more statistically.
So the question is, are the frequencies that are based
likely
on the translation cloud affected by the size of the corpora? And that larger corpora will by definition have more dominant translation words. Yes. So for the majority of text in English, city will by definition be bigger than civitate. Well, the translation cloud that you see there is based on user data, mostly. So at this point, I'm not entirely sure if we can talk about massively big corpora, honestly. And it very much depends on how the users have translated a certain word. And by the way, Ugarit, as Franziska will mention in a minute, enables you to establish correspondences across multiple tokens. So ideally, civitate would be translated by a user, not necessarily with just the word city, depending on, again, the function in the context. So there is no completely automatic way of establishing, no spontaneous way of establishing whether there would be like a very large majority of correspondences at this point. But of course, in that case, this is where POS tagging and morphology come into establishing a difference between those two words.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's hand over to Franziska then. Apologies for the impromptu distraction.
Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me and you can see myself, because I was briefly thrown out of the system right in time for the talk. I'm very happy to join this session with Chiara, who has contributed so much to the Ugarit alignment tool, who was there from the beginning together with other colleagues, especially Tarek Youssef. And Chiara has already paved the way to the more mundane task that I have to show you a live demo of Ugarit. And now bear with me, because we are switching between different technologies right now. I have a presentation and I have a couple of windows open, so this is going to be a ride, hopefully not a too bumpy one. And another announcement, just keep a drink of your choice ready, because there's something to celebrate in this session. So, and I'm going to share my presentation right now. Starting with Ugarit as a tool for text alignment. There's a couple of links in this presentation. That's the one you're also going to have if you join this Sunoikisis session at the GitHub tool, with the links that you have in this syllabus. There is links to Ugarit itself, especially if you're keen on doing the exercise of this session. This is, of course, a mandatory link for this case. And as one of the examples that I'm going to show you today, how we use Ugarit in research and teaching, one example of those will be the Rosetta Stone. And to get some more background information, there's also links to the Digital Rosetta Stone project, to a publication that we did and presented in one of the conferences Monica Berti and I were organizing. That was one in 2015. And there's a couple of other links, which I have basically all open right now in my browser, and we're going to work our way through that. The first one, and that's the part where the drinks are coming in, is a link to a brand new online exhibition. That's currently right now available only in German. The English version is work in progress. This is something I'm going to put together during December. And I'm going to move with you a little bit through this exhibit. So this is going to be our digital vernissage today. Other links on this slide include links to visual alignments and to the alignment in Ugarit. And those of you who are following Sunoikisis syllabi pretty closely might have already seen that. My team and I have presented on that 2 years ago. So if you're keen on knowing a bit more about that, then you can also go to the summer session of 2018, that's session 12, where we have talked in detail about the digital Rosetta Stone project. Yeah, so what is Ugarit? Ugarit, as Chiara has already mentioned, is a web-based tool for manual alignment. You don't need to download a program. You can just do this in your browser for parallel corpora, for different texts, and so on and so on. You've already heard about this a few minutes ago. The first aim of Ugarit was to generate accurate training data sets for our automatic word alignment system, but you've seen already that this has progressed and that our goals are now farther and wider than what we've done in the past. You can, of course, download things. It's a crowdsourcing project. That's the good news, because all the elaborate things and the goals that Chiara has been talking about a few minutes ago, the good thing about them is the good news. You can all contribute to this, and I really invite you to do that. And if you have to do the exercise, you have to contribute to our crowdsourcing project. It's a great tool in learning, but also in researching. Chiara has shared with me a couple of statistics, so there's really a lot of people who are using Ugarit now. We're pretty happy about that. It started in March 2017, and for us, working with the Digital Rosetta Stone project that also started in summer or autumn of 2017, we were very happy that this was available at that point, because it served our purpose to align 3 different languages or 3 different versions of a text together with the respective translations. So this is really, really great tool for working with text alignment. And to give you a couple of other numbers, to this day we have 39 different languages aligned within Ugarit. That's the statistic on the right-hand side of the slide. More than 24,000 texts have created, more than 485,000 translation pairs. Those are very impressive statistics, and it's not the first time that I'm showing these numbers. And in the years that we progressed, these numbers always went higher and higher. Over 400 people are using that right now. Those are scholars all over the world, the colleagues of us, but also students who are engaging in adding texts in Ugarit, trying out things. And I can also echo what Chiara has said before, that especially in teaching, if students or anyone who's interested in using Ugarit is taking a text, aligning them with another text, and then trying to compare this with a language that he or she has no knowledge of, it's really facilitating to try to get a grasp and in this language that you have never seen before. I had people aligning Egyptian and English texts, or Egyptian and German texts, but they had no knowledge of Latin or Greek. And we were working with texts that had versions in all these languages, and then they even were eager and challenged to work with the languages which they had no clue about before. The top chart is showing the languages which are currently aligned. English is pretty dominant there. This has to do with that English is, of course, our modern lingua franca of our days, and a lot of ancient texts and historical languages texts are translated into English, but it has also to do with that English is becoming more and more a source language. Ugarit is coming, of course, from our field of ancient studies, that is classics, Egyptology, Coptology, Arabic studies, but we can see now that more and more people are also aligning more modern, that's saying 17th, 18th century texts, or modern language, modern Chinese poetry translated into English, and so on and so on. So it's pretty impressive. But still, Greek and Latin are the most prevalent languages of the sources that we have. Right. And before we go to Ugarit, I have been promising you to go to the online exhibition, and that's what we do right now. The online exhibition is called, and I have to go now to the beginning, all good things come in threes. This will be the English title, matching the German Aller guten Dinge sind drei, about the Rosetta Stone and its decipherment of the Egyptian. The main idea to do this digital exhibit was that I want to try out the software which is behind that for my work at the Saxon Academy of Sciences and Humanities. I'm working for a lot of projects that deal with historical contents from the ancient world until contemporary time. So there's even a research project that deal with historical and sociological approaches to COVID-19, but also people who work with ancient Coptic sources. And all of these people have something in common. They want to talk about their work and want to showcase this in a way that's not only a museum exhibit, which is difficult in these times anyway, but also to do this digitally. And since no one volunteered with a big chunk of material such as images, GIF animations, videos, audio guides, and so on and so on. Since no one volunteered and said, hey, I have a bunch of material here, then I said, oh, well, I have a bunch of material on Rosetta Stone because of the digital Rosetta Stone project. That's why I chose this material as my first test case for this tool. The tool is called Omeka. That's an open source software used very frequently for digital exhibitions. And I'm using this in a customized version for the Deutsche Digitale Bibliothek. This is from the German government, a sort of database for cultural heritage where there's a lot of sources already in a database, but not that much on Rosetta Stone yet. So you can see a lot of institutions have been involved into that. I don't want to go into detail here. You can see that for yourself because the link will be in the class material, and you can also read everything that I told you right now, what was the intention to do that, how it's structured, and maybe we can make digital exhibitions and cultural heritage management also a topic for Sunoikisis in one of the next sessions. But I'd like to show you, while going through this exhibit, a few points on the Rosetta Stone itself, just to know what we're dealing with. This picture is a reconstruction of what the Rosetta Stone might have been. It is just a fragment of something that's much larger, and I hope you can see that in the graphic that is on this slide of the exhibition. And it's basically an inscription of 3 different versions of text, the top part being in hieroglyphs, the middle part being in Demotic, and the lower part being in ancient Greek. So the knowledge of ancient Greek was something that we never lost, but the knowledge about the decipherment of ancient Egyptian is something that was not available after the, say, 5th or 6th century AD. So the top part in hieroglyphs is actually in the language Middle Egyptian, and the middle part in Demotic is in the language Enscript Demotic, so that's the same name for both. And scholars, when they found the stone, had the idea that, oh, well, this is an inscription with 3 different things, and the Demotic part and the Greek part looks sort of the same length, so it might be the same text, but in different languages and scripts. And this is how the whole story of the decipherment started. The text itself is a decree with different rules that the king and the priest came about on different checks, balances, and rules, benefactions for the temples, for the animal cults, for the ruler cult of the pharaoh itself. And the pharaoh in this case is Ptolemy V, and the decree was erected in 196 BCE in the Ptolemaic Empire in ancient Egypt. It was found in a city called Rosetta, hence the name Rosetta Stone. Right. I'm scrolling a bit through it. There's a couple of examples what the decree is about. It's formulated in a very interesting way. The king and the priests met on a synod, that is a meeting that took place every year, and they came to a couple of conclusions. For instance, that the pharaoh is safeguarding the borders of Egypt, and it's formulated in the way that the priests are speaking what they agreed on with the king. So in a political, scientific way, it's a very interesting way of communication decisions of a king. The story, how the stone came to the British Museum, is a very interesting one. It's a story which is partly told in this digital exhibit, but it's not going to be told here. This is actually a thing that the British Museum itself will tell, because in 2022 we will celebrate 200 years of the decipherment of Egyptian of this guy. This is Jean-François Champollion, who is, of course, prominently featured in the digital exhibition because he was able to decipher the hieroglyphs and the demotic version and to work out the basic principle of the Egyptian script, and was honored, therefore, quite prominently in his hometown. Okay. For the purpose of the digital Rosetta Stone project that we were working on, and the purpose was to create a new digital edition, a modern edition with alignment and tree banking of the stone, we went to London. We were able to take photographs of the stone, and we, that is, in the digital Rosetta Stone project, apart from Monica Berti and me, Josephine Hensel, Miriam Amin, and we were assisted by Eleni Bosia, who you can also see in the front part of this photograph, and at the right side, Angelos Pampoutis. Both are professors at the University of Florida, and they have created a technology called Shape from Shading, a way how to take photographs and combine them for a 3D model of the Rosetta Stone. And therefore, we were very lucky to cooperate with our colleagues from the British Museum of the Egyptian Galleries and take new photographs, which we are also going to share with scholars and have published a depth map. You can have a look at the exhibit later, how these images are combined, and the result will be a very well readable, if you know hieroglyphs, of course, and Demotic and Greek, of this text. Right. This is something we have published recently, a depth map of the Rosetta Stone, which you can download for free on the web. Right. Even as a very handy smartphone app. Right, and now I'm going to switch back to Ugarit. This is where the alignment is coming in. First of all, on our website, we have taken one of those new images that we took and put the Rosetta Stone on it. And then I hope you can see that no matter what tool you're using. If you're watching this live or watching this later, I recommend zooming this to a big screen and maximizing your screen. You might see if I hover with the mouse over this website, on Rosetta Stone Project website, that we have highlighted which part in which version of the Rosetta Stone corresponds to which point. And if you click on these, you will get to Ugarit, and you can also see translations, transliterations of the Egyptian or of the Greek. For instance, you have the word Enhero Ipenwet, that's part of Centris. On this day, a degree. This is the part where the degree actually is starting, corresponding to the Greek word Psephisma. This is a very handy thing to have, and if you click on it, you go directly into Ugarit and have the alignment. So this is what I'm doing right now. We are now in Ugarit on the website, developed basically by Tarek Youssef on the framework of his PhD thesis at the University of Leipzig. And in the middle of the site, you have a visualization, which is showing basically the goal of the tool. And I'm not going into detail here because Chiara has already spoken a lot about tools of translation alignment. You can access the text as a non-registered and non-logged-in user if you just click on an individual user, and you can see what this person has aligned. And I've been picking someone right now, our dear friend and colleague So Miyagawa, who is now working on a new position in Japan. So kudos to So if he is listening to this. So is a scholar in Coptic, the latest form, the youngest form of ancient Egyptian, because he was working in a big academy project there, and he has aligned, for instance, Coptic texts, in this case the Bible, with its respective Greek version. This is in the middle, and on the right side he has the English version. And you can already see if I'm going with my mouse hovering over the individual word, you can see how this corresponds to the other versions. Yeah, for instance. Some words are in red, like this F. he has written. This does not correspond to something that you can find in the other versions, because sometimes it's formulated in a different way. We will see this soon at the demo. Right? Or for instance, here we have a word, ecclesia in Coptic. Its Greek loanword is ecclesiais in Greek, and churches in the English translation of it. So is also doing other interesting things. He is also aligning fragments of Coptic texts, in this case, a fragment of Besa, that's a philosopher who was part of the school of the famous bishop Archimatrites Sheluta. He was aligning these words together with Japanese. And you can already see, if you go over the Coptic words and you don't know how to pronounce them, that you get already some help how to pronounce these words. Here, dogmatitze, which is again a Greek loan word in Coptic. Or if you click transliterate, you can see that already. I have already put this on right here. But now we're going to do a short demo. And for these reasons, you need to log into Ugarit, so you need to create an account. I'm going to log in with the Rosetta Stone account right now, and starting on my dashboard to create a new text group on the main group. And as a title, I'm doing Sunoikisis test cases, and I can add a description. And right now I have created a text group, which I enter right now. And if I click on, sorry, got a little bit lost right now. Just a second. Oh, yeah, right. And then I have to click new alignment. I've been deciding for doing 2 languages right now only. You can even do 3, which is pretty handy if you work on decrees such as the Rosetta Stone. So I have prepared a couple of a sentence of the Rosetta Stone for this case. This is from what we call part 11 of it. I'm also pasting into this the English translation, that you get a basic idea of what this is about, what we're doing right now, what this sentence is. The left part here is not Akkadian, but this is ancient Egyptian. It's Demotic, what we have right here. And I'm going to delete this thing, what I've pasted here, and the other part is ancient Greek. So this step is actually something that should take a lot of time, or which you should actually be very meticulous about. I actually recommend that you, when you type your text you want to align, do this in an extra text program like Word or the processor of your choice, OpenOffice, LibreOffice, whatever is out there. Because once you have pasted this in here and you are in this window and then you go to the alignment, you can't change anything of the text. So it's impossible to delete this P, add an extra bracket or whatever. Yeah. And one extra caveat is also something: do not use these brackets, those square ones, because they will be recognized by Ugarit as XML codes and will be set into programming, so into code language. So never use these brackets, just use different ones. Unfortunately, that's not possible to use them. And if you have languages such as ancient Egyptian here, this is the transliteration of the Demotic version, you have to use Unicode characters. You can't paste in transliteration or anything, which especially the Egyptologists are using. So that's very important to keep that in mind. So if you're ready, if you have pasted your text, you're satisfied with it, you click Align, which is now the blue button here at the lower part. And then another window opens, and this is the part where you can't change anything. I have put this now to maximum here right now, so unfortunately I can't make this window any bigger. Once again, if you watch this to YouTube or elsewhere, please make sure you use a big screen. So what is the sentence? The sentence from part 11 of the Rosetta Stone is actually a part of the dating formula. Dating formulas in ancient texts, especially Egyptian texts, can be very long because they contain information on certain priests which had a position in certain years. And in this case, it is Irene, daughter of Ptolemy, who is priestess of Arsinoe, the one who loves her father. So this is actually a subordinate clause. I have picked this clause because it has a couple of personal names, and this is actually matching a little bit what Champollion did. He was looking for personal names first. Ptolemaios, Cleopatra. This is how he was able to decipher Egyptian, and this is what we are going to do right now. So you know already through the English translation there is someone called Irene. And in the Greek text, if you're more familiar with Greek, you have here the Irenes. And this matches in the demotic Hirana. So some H sound was apparently existent in this ancient pronunciation. And you can click on those, it's both green. And if you click here on the little disk symbol for saving, we have our first alignment. This is it. This is how you do it. Once again, you can see already there is this Irene is a priestess. The word for priestess, of course, if you know Greek, you found out that in this certain casus, this is the hiereas word. This corresponds to the demotic wa-bet. It's a feminine word, so this is already separated parts. You have to keep the shift or the control or Apple button pushed in order to get all the elements here in the demotic. And this happens if you want to align more than one part of a word to each other. So wa-bet, wa is priest, bet is priestess, corresponds to this Greek word. And we have the second alignment, our priestess, Irene. And this is the way how you continue. We have Arsinoe, the queen, of whom Irene is priestess. And this corresponds to Arsina in the demotic once again. And she has also an epithet, Philopatoros, in the casus, corresponding to, and this is a demotic version now, how this is described, ta merit es, the one who loves her father. Very interesting. You learn a lot about languages, a lot about those functions. And of Ptolemy, this is the last one I'm going to do here once again in a Greek case, corresponds to the demotic Ptolemies, right? And if you go on and on like this and click save to DB, that's always important, always save your data, then it will show you in the next step how much is already aligned. You will have a bar up here coming up, how much you have aligned. I switched back to a part of the Rosetta Stone that we have already aligned. That's the beginning of the Rosetta Stone, including the English translation, which we also aligned in this part of Ugarit. And you can see you have only 58% of the Egyptian aligned, 58% and 58% of the Greek. This is because there's always some words or some contents which don't have a counterpart in the other version. There is not always a match. And this is the way how texts work. This is the way how humans work. And especially in the ancient world, we didn't have the one-to-one translation. There's always things that are omitted or things that can't be exactly aligned to the other word. So if you have, let's say, 70 to 80% alignment status, this is actually good, especially for ancient languages. So, and I bet this is basically what I wanted to tell you. Once again, very important, this first step where you enter your text before you start your alignment, be really 100% sure that what you entered is free of typos and the way you wanted to have it, the brackets you wanted to have, because you can't change this right now. The only thing you can do is that you delete it and start from scratch once again. And another thing is, if you align very long text, such as the Rosetta Stone, split these texts in little sentence by sentence or in parts that make sense, that are within a certain context, and align them. Smaller parts, not really super long text, because this could be really, really tricky if you spot a little glitch in this part. Right. And save your changes. I'm going back to StreamYard right now and stop sharing my screen. Oh, Gabi's doing that better.
Cool. Thank you, Franziska. Great, yes.
Unfortunately, I can't hear you.
Can anyone else hear me?
Okay. As long as
Yes,
you hear me,
okay.
that's fine.
Yeah, we could hear you fine. So I had one question about your example Egyptian text there, Franziska, if you can hear me. The curly braces that were in your text, were they part of the editorial convention, or were they part of how you transcribe demotic? It was the last letter of priestess was in curly brackets. I'm not sure if he was hearing me. Okay, well, in the meantime, does anyone else have anything they want to comment on or mention? We'll save questions for Franziska for when she returns. There is a question about the pedagogical value of Ugarit, which Chiara might like to start.
Yeah, I can answer that.
Addressing.
So the pedagogical applications of Ugarit, we have 2 papers forthcoming about that. They're not, I had all intentions of including them in this presentation, but unfortunately they're not published yet. But one of them is coming sometime next month, and the other one is coming next year. So there's going to be that. And about the potential errors in crowdsourcing. Well, there is kind of this is kind of a long response, but there's kind of a difference between ensuring that there is complete exactness in the data, but in the database, and having a suitable pedagogical assignment for the reading and learning of ancient languages. It is kind of a difficult balance, because on the one hand, there is a database that would definitely be perfected if it had a completely perfect and completely matching alignment pairs, but perfect and matching alignment pairs are not necessarily what you want if you're trying to assign translation alignments in education. And I can tell you that it's not necessarily extremely crucial that you give us perfectly aligned pairs if that doesn't work for the pedagogical effort, because eventually the idea is that we should be able to clean up the database in different ways. And we have a very large and potentially very imperfect database at this point. So that is not going to be, it's not going to be easy to clean it up. So a smaller exercise, smaller pedagogical exercise, is definitely not going to ruin our database, even if it doesn't have completely perfect pairs or completely perfect matches. My suggestion in terms of guiding assignments is very much depending on the general stage of the learning experience of the students, and in what exactly you would like to achieve. In terms of assigning a translation alignment with Ugarit. I have one general comment about that, which is to try to frame those exercises in a very meaningful way, and trying to guide the students into understanding what really is the purpose of doing translation alignment, which is examining sort of the different ways in which languages express meaning through different things, word order, expressions, constructs, and so on. Rather than just giving them a translation alignment and not saying anything about what they should consider and think, because that encourages a view of translation alignment that is not enough nuanced for learners, and it's kind of at that point it becomes like a very automatic and very sort of black box kind of task that doesn't really achieve probably the desired effect. So I hope that sort of answers the question. It's a very complex matter, though, and so that's the reason why we're publishing papers about that.
So I guess another way to answer the same question will be for Franziska to assuming she's back and can hear us now, to present the exercise, which is what she was going to do next, which is our suggestion for what you might go away and do, and this is a suggestion for students and instructors alike.
Exactly. Thank you, Gabby. So the exercise, just a second, is going to be to go on Ugarit and create a bilingual alignment, just as the one I have done before with this part of Rosetta Stone, of a parallel corpus of your choice. Something you have already in mind, you'd like to align an ancient text, for instance, with a translation. But if you don't have an idea yet, we have two suggestions, which could work very nicely. Those are translations or expressions that match of the magical papyri from ancient Egypt, or the Bible parallel corpus, which you have already here with the link to GitHub where you can access the data. So the idea is to choose two languages that you are familiar with and focus on the difference across the translation to see what words align perfectly, which words align imperfectly. You have seen it already on what I've done, or you can get some inspirations on things that are already up on Ugarit and freely accessible, and to see what the percentage at the end is. Don't worry if it's not going to be 100%. It will hardly ever get to 100%. As I said, 70 to 80% is fine. And to make choices, you will have to make choices where you align with each other. For instance, you have one language where you have one word, and in another language this corresponds to a whole expression made out of several words. But make your choices and make those consistent, and also document this with your alignment. There is boxes where you can write in comments, and it would be important to note things like that down and be consistent in what you do. That's always very important. So those are things I have, for instance, done. That's now the note for the colleagues in exams and seminars where students had to align texts, some of their choice or some which were assigned because of the topic of the class. And they had to defend this in a kind of viva in an oral exam. Right, and after you have completed this, choose a parallel text in a third language that you do not know. Then you can go to Ugarit and use the interface where you can enter 3 different languages and try out how far you come, which words you recognize, which words sound familiar to you, or which way you just have a basic idea where to go. So good luck with that. Get in touch with Chiara or me if you have any questions, or if you want to have suggestions concerning the topic you're choosing. And we, of course, also open to the colleagues who have further questions about that. Okay, coming back to StreamYard.
Yeah, and so, for example, if you're translating between a language that doesn't have the article and a language that does, you want to make a decision early on. Is the article part of the noun in the language that has it, or is the article something that is unmatched? If you're translating between a language that uses case endings and so forth, and a language that just uses lots of prepositions to reflect the same thing, is the preposition something, is of the man aligned to a single word in Latin, or is it just man aligned to that word and the other two are unmatched because they don't have exact equivalents? That's a decision you have to make right at the beginning, and that could lead to you having 2/3 of your text on the line.
And then, of course, as Franziska said, the number one rule is consistency. When you make such decision, be consistent and don't change it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So as for the Rosetta Stone, we had some interesting discoveries when we were aligning the 3 ways. Especially Josefina Hensel was making these discoveries that we sometimes have parts which are completely omitted in one version, parts which have a different order. For instance, land and sea in one language is in Greek sea and land, maybe because this is more idiomatic in Greek. Or a certain divinity, an Egyptian divinity, is corresponding to a certain Greek divinity, which is actually not that common, because we know which divinities are corresponding to each other. But in this case, we had 2 which are not very common, and we have random places where we found it. So there's always ideas where we can continue with our research. Yeah, and this will be also at a later point put into print and publication.
So one thing that I've suggested to my students, for example, who I know are among those watching this, but others may be doing different type of exercises, is to discuss the translation you're going to do. Decide which 2 texts you're going to align to each other in the group. Go away and align them separately, then come back and compare notes. and see what different decisions you've made, which is not going to be because one person's got it wrong. I mean, not usually anyway, but because of those decisions you have to make and those all the different ways you can align things. So I think that's an interesting exercise. It might be interesting actually if some of the people in the group are aligning between two languages they know very well, and some of the people in the group are aligning with languages they know less well or not at all, and see how they may end up making different decisions. That's always fun. I mean, I think the consistency is obviously really important if you're doing this for a project, if you're doing this, you know, for an outcome. But if you're doing this as a learning experience, you will make those decisions as you go along. And you may end up having to go back and change your decision. So, you know, you'll end up being inconsistent because you're making up your mind. So it's something to strive for, but not ever something to achieve, at least at this level, I think. I don't see any other questions in the live chat yet. But if anyone does have anything, throw it in there very quickly. We might spot it before we finish. Does anyone else in the call want to bring anything else up before we go?
I just wanted to say, if after this session you're going to use Ugarit for whatever reason, for a pedagogical exercise or a project and so on, let us know, please. Let us know if you use it, how you use it, and so on, because we're working on a list of potential collaborators and use cases. And it's important to know that people are using it and appreciating it, and that whether they have feedback on features that we can add, on things that we can improve.
Great. Okay, then there don't seem to be any other immediate questions. So please do have a go at that exercise. There is also in the session page, there isn't yet actually, I've just noticed, but I will add a link to a forum discussion of this exercise where you can post, especially if you have technical problems with Ugarit or anything questions about how it's going and so forth. And I will assign the ticket in that forum not only to myself to keep an eye on it, but also with their permission to Chiara and Franziska, so they may be able to give insights occasionally as well. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Thank you very much, both of you, and everyone else in the session. And we'll see you all next week. The next week is the last session in this semester, which will again follow on a little bit on the theme of linguistic methods, as we'll be talking about visualization, including text visualization using the Voyant tools set. So hopefully see you then. Bye.